Hi, this is Miss Litton, and this is 7th period review for Honors Biology, and we are going, this is for chapter 27, part 2, and this is the process of evolution, and your guiding question was, and appers, you should be able to answer this question, how can there be so many similarities among organisms, yet so many different kinds of plants, animals, and microorganisms? So it's the process of evolution. So we want to just review this briefly. It's that evolution is a result of 4 factors. You have the potential to increase. So there's room to move and change. There are variations in your DNA. If there's no variations, you're not going to get any evolution, right? Now, where could those variations have come from? Mutations, exactly. That there's competition for resources, so not everybody's going to win. And then the best adapted ones will win. If there's no competition, you'll have all different kinds of organisms. You won't have to compete. There's no drive, no push for that adaptation to survive. Okay, microevolution and, sweetheart, will you explain maybe back there? Okay, microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is within the species, within that population, and macroevolution is to a whole new species. Your classic experiments for microevolution, number 1 is the Hardy-Weinberg moth. See, Hardy-Weinberg, that's not what I wanted to say. I don't know what I wanted to say there. It's a mystery. The moth, you have the light-colored moth that had the highest gene allele frequency during pre-industrial revolution, and the black moth was always selected against, but both were within the same species. Then in post-industrial revolution, when the trees became covered with soot, then you got more of the black moth and less of the white. And also the other example I gave you was that salamander, or not the salamander, the skink, the 3-toed skink who carries the embryos within. As long as they'll still interbreed, they are the same species. But if they do not interbreed anymore, then they are a new species, and that would be macroevolution. Yes?
So you had Hardy-Weinberg. What was the other? There was like another name that you mentioned.
No, Hardy-Weinberg's coming up. That just came out.
What was that other name? It started with an F.
Population genetics.
No, like a name, like a person's name. It was like their last name or something.
I don't know.
No.
Okay, so anyway, that's microevolution. Then we talked about, and this is, you have this on your, in Google Classroom, I have the 5 fingers of evolution if that will help you. But the idea with population genetics says, it's kind of like dialing it into exactly what is evolution. And evolution is a change in allele frequency. So you might know the allele frequencies in this particular population. We know because it's drawn on them. Okay, but generally speaking, you don't know what the allele frequencies are. So you have 2 equations that you can work with. Okay, P plus Q equals 1, and P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. And when you look at P plus Q equals 1, this right here, it's a very fast girl, watch how fast she'll go across this room. This right here, when you look at P plus Q equals 1, this right here is your gene pool. Okay, that's how many big T's and how many little t's do you have in your gene pool. But remember, organisms that come out, we're talking about diploid organisms. So they're going to either have 2 P's, or they're going to have a P and a Q, or they're going to have what? 2 Q's. So these are individuals that come out of the gene pool. And this one right here represents your homozygous recessives. These are your homozygous dominants. And these are your heterozygotes, right? And if I was going to make a Punnett square like this, and I was going to cross my P's and my Q's, right? Then in my Punnett square, then these 2 squares right here, it represents these 2 PQs right here. My P squared is this one right here. And then my Q squared is this box right here. So that's why you say P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So if I give you something, if I tell you how many individuals right here, if I say there are 16 individuals right here, that means I have 16 out of whatever, let's say it is. Let's say it's 20. Okay, I'm writing a different number than I'm saying. 16 out of 50. 50, let's say, is q squared. Right? Then could I solve for q?
Yeah.
Yeah. All I would do, take your magic calculator, is I would say, okay, I need a light on this one. 16 divided by 50 is 0.32. So 32% of this population is the homozygous recessive. Now I don't know for sure, but if I take the square root of that, that comes out to 0.56. Okay? So that means if I square root this response, right, I know that Q right here is 0.56. Well then that means that the frequency of P has to be what? Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so once you have that, then I could predict how many would be P squared. I could predict how many would be 2 PQs of my population. But again, those are predictions just based on how many recessives I have. And we did that in the room probably. Did I have however many blue-eyed people we have? Did I do that in the classroom?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we predicted out how many of you are homozygous brown eyes and how many of you are heterozygous brown eyes. And what Hardy-Weinberg says is, now that you understand what allele frequencies are, if these allele frequencies change, if Q, instead of being 0.56, jumps to 0.7, then P has to be if Q is 0.7,
P3.
yeah, then P has to be 0.3. If the allele frequencies change, what is occurring? Evolution. If you still mate, though, within your same species, that evolution would be called micro, but if the allele frequencies change so much from the original population that you don't interbreed, that would be macro. Then we look to see what are the things that cause evolution. That was our 5 fingers of evolution. So the smallest one was what? Small populations. And then we said, okay, why do small populations cause changes in allele frequency? And we said because small populations are susceptible to genetic drift. And we said there were 2 kinds of genetic drift. I'm going to go start a colony over here with a group of people. What would that be called? You can, appers. What is that called? I'm going to go genetic drift, 2 kinds of genetic drift. Founder's effect. So I'm going to found this new place. I found this new place, founder's effect, with this small, it's not a full representative. If all of us went and started a colony somewhere, are we a true representation of Oak Park High School? No, okay? So it's whatever genes we have to start out with and selection pressures we have and mutations, right? We can change as a result of that, okay? So founder's effect. Then the other one is when you go through a crisis of some sort, a disaster. That is the bottleneck, right? So genetic drift, when we think about those 5 fingers, let me go to that. Okay, so here's bottleneck effect. When you go through that crisis, not all of them survive, and so this is not a true representative of the original. So that can change allele frequencies. Then we said what? What was this? Non-random mating, right. So I'm saying this lion is better to mate with than this lion. So that will change allele frequencies because if everybody agrees that that's the best kind of lion, they're all going to want to have sex with that lion. And his alleles, his traits are going to increase. Yes?
Is that what the no peeking at our cards when we were doing like the class?
Yes, I didn't want you to have any selection.
So
I
that's
wanted
why
you
I
to be
wrote
random.
that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, then what was the middle finger? Mutations. Now, mutations can, like for instance, blue-eyed people, you're a mutation. Red-haired people, you are a mutation, right? But that's a good adaptation if you're red-haired in certain places, a bad adaptation to be fair-skinned in other places. Blue eyes really doesn't matter, right? But mutations, you can't prevent those. Those are going to happen. So as a result of mutations, you are going to change allele frequencies. And then pointer finger was what? Yeah, gene flow. Sometimes you're going to lose some members of your population. Sometimes you're going to gain new blood. That's going to change your allele frequency. But the most important one is what? Adaptation. Because adaptation lends itself to natural selection. Yeah.
So then is gene flow and genetic drift different?
Yes.
Okay.
But I could see how you could put them together. But genetic drift is something that's typical of it's a small population is prone to that. And genetic drift is where it's not that your allele frequency changed for any good reason. It was full on chance.
Okay.
Where gene flow is saying our population changed, our allele frequencies changed because new people came in or we lost people. Yeah. There was a migration of people in or out of our population. That's why it happened. But definitely smaller populations who experience some kind of migratory effect because they're small, that tends to change their population. But you would say that was gene flow. Okay. All right. So then we identified what kind of things could cause those changes, and said it's inevitable then that evolution is going to occur, because there's no way that we can always have populations that are large, that we can always have random mating, that we can prevent mutations, that we can prevent migration or gene flow, that we can prevent selection. Since we can't prevent these 5 things from happening, they will happen, then evolution must be happening. Does that make sense on the big picture? Okay, so then what we said is, let's talk a little bit more. We mentioned about Darwin, and in this word natural selection, we hear the word nature. Nature is selecting what's the best trait. In this case, better to be a taller giraffe than a shorter giraffe, because you're going to be able to get more food. We looked at characteristics of seal or sea lion to see what traits they would need. And we also mentioned that when the environment changes, which may be due to us, okay, what's going to happen? Some species, like if an environment changes from a semi-arid to a full-on desert, so you'll have an increase in some members of species because they're in a desert, and those animals who can survive in the desert are adapted. But you'll have a decrease in those species in possible extinction who couldn't handle the change. Or maybe as a result of the change, you get an emergence of a whole new species. But the biggest one you're probably going to get is going to get extinction, okay, as we change that environment. Okay, then the very last thing we talked about, are you okay with the population genetics stuff? Yeah. Okay. The very last thing we talked about was the process of speciation. And the most common form of speciation is allopatric. So some barrier came between us, some physical barrier, so we're not mating anymore. It could be water, it could be a desert, something came between us. It could be a rift or a river, but because we start out with different initial gene frequencies, due to the separation, it's not exactly going to be pure on both sides or whatever. We have different selection pressures because our 2 environments could be different. We undergo different, mutations, right? We undergo different mutations, and so we change over time. So when the barrier is removed and we get back together, we don't like each other anymore. And as a result, that would be the most common form. Something happened to separate you. Could be a storm, could be weather, separated a population of moths. They went their own way, the storm blew them back together again, they don't mate together anymore. Okay? And we looked at salamanders as an example for that. Okay, sympatric speciation, I was right next to you when you evolved. Usually that's got to be a chromosomal change of some sort, and that would be much more likely in a plant than any kind of animal. And then I gave you this diagram right here. And this one on the left would be modeling what? Allopatric. This one would be sympatric. And then the last thing we talked about was adaptive radiation. And this is when you get this new area like the islands or whatever, and you have a finch species, they're going to keep becoming specialized in order to reduce competition, filling every possible potential niche, and that's called adaptive radiation when they spread out like that. And we said Darwin's finches do that. We also said a really good example was the Hawaiian honey creepers. Yes?
Is this kind of
Yes, it would be a great example of resource partitioning in order to decrease competition. Okay, then the pace of it. We said there were two paces. And really these are bookends, right? It could be anything in between. So phyletic gradualism, you're going to see that slow, steady change. The horse getting slowly bigger and bigger and bigger. The giraffe's necks getting longer and longer and longer. That's phyletic gradualism. You're going to see a lot of transitions in between. Punctuated equilibrium is a real rapid, forceful change, rapid as in a million years. You won't see a lot of transitional fossils. And probably most speciation falls somewhere in between those two. That was it. Questions or concerns you want to ask me about that?
Do you have any like quiz questions?
Yes. Well, I have probably some embedded in here, but there are also some at the end of your book too. But here is one, a set right here. So log in however you want. I think there's 6 questions here.
We're just gonna do it.
Miss Lynn,
Don't they come?
Yes.
can you give me an example of microevolution?
Yeah. Would one of you like to offer up an example of microevolution? The moths and pre and post industrial revolution and light and dark colored moths?
So is it just a change in the phenotype
Yes.
and it's not?
Well,
Okay.
think that through. It's a selection for one, right? A certain grouping of alleles over another, right?
Okay, yeah, so it's a different.
But you can, go ahead.
It's a different gene frequency, but the difference between micro and macro is speciation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Within a species without, like, when you look around this room, there's variations in hair color,
Yeah.
height, right? All those kinds of things. But we all could still interbreed, right? So any changes that we see here would be examples of microevolution. Or maybe we get taller. If we're getting taller and taller and taller, what kind of selection is that? You should know that one.
It's
Directional.
Directional, yeah.
Yeah, direction. Yes.
Are we gonna have questions with like where we need a calculator and we'll need to?
You know, I don't know because I haven't written it yet.
Okay, but should we like bring a calculator? Just
I have calculators in the back of the room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Carrie, you in? All right. APs, you should come in here and see if you can answer these questions too. My APs. I have small apes. My apers running around the room. Come on, do it. Try it.
Look over to the other shoulder.
All right. You look over her shoulder? Okay.
Yes.
This class lab now, so the difference is when you do questions like this, we can't guess what we ours think it is on the video, because you have to wait for it to be done to see the
I know.
That's
It's
the only bummer.
I know. I 100% agree with you. I'm going to pause this while you guys are doing this. Remind me. Okay, everybody's answered, so we're going to go through these real quick. So the creation of a new species due to geographic barriers is called allopatric, and everybody got that. Is there anything called isolation speciation? No. Allomorphic speciation? No. I made up a word. Sympatric, is that such a thing? What is sympatric speciation?
Alongside.
Usually due to chromosomes.
Chromosomal change
Is there something
in
called symbiotic speciation?
No.
No, that's totally made up. Okay, which of the following models is supported by the observation that few transitional links are found? Punctuated. When you punch someone, it's very fast. You're not going to see all those transitional. But in gradualism, you might be able to see a lot of those transitional forms. Okay, so it should have just been B, which is what you got. When only a few individuals survive unfavorable times, a disaster, we're going through a disaster, losing a majority of the genotypes, that is called the bottleneck. Only a few can make it through the neck of the bottle, right? Only a few can make it through during that. Genetic drift produces changes in allele frequencies within a gene pool due to chance. Yes, genetic drift. If you're drifting, that's all about chance, right? Natural selection isn't about chance. Natural selection, nature is selecting what has the best adaptations. Genetic drift is, I don't know where we're going to end up. We're drifting, okay? 5, natural selection occurs when the better adapted members of a population reproduce to a greater degree than the less well-adapted members. That is like the definition, right, of what natural selection is. And the proliferation of Darwin's finches is an example of adaptive radiation. Yes. I could have said, or honey creepers. That would also be adaptive radiation. Okay, is the evolution of the horse adaptive radiation? No. You saw horses, directional selection, just getting more, taller and taller and taller.
Is there a term for that one?
Directional selection.
Okay,
Yeah. And we talked about disruptive selection, where you select for either extreme, right?
Oh, so those ones are so directional.
Yeah, you know what? I should have told you any of those could be on the quiz, but I didn't re-release your scores to you yet, so no, don't worry about that yet. Okay, other questions or concerns you might have? Okay, do the ones at the back of the book so you feel comfortable with those, okay? All right. Have a piece of toast. Don't stay up too late.